Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith and we're going to jump right into part number 2 of our Too Many Bones Undertow playthrough. We're using Duster and Gasket. For those of you that are familiar with Too Many Bones, you know that the Gearlocs within this world are very, very different. The skill dice that are used, the rules that go along with those skill dice for each and every Gearloc are different. And I really want to make sure we all have a good handle on how each of the Gearlocs that I'm going to be using during this playthrough work, so that we can go into this on the same page. So Gasket here has a fantastic video which was created by the Chip Theory Games team. Adam Carlson put together that video, and I highly recommend that you watch it. You'll see a link pop up on the screen if you haven't already to go check that out. Now, if you're already familiar with Gasket, you can pass by this and we'll continue on. And for those wondering, there is also a video specific to Duster on the Chip Theory Games YouTube page that I highly recommend that you check out as well. The link will show up on the screen. Now, if you are already familiar or have played the game and own it, and you know the rules and how Duster and Gasket work, then we can move forward with checking out how the encounter voting went. So the very first thing that I threw back to the community at the end of the last video was in regards to whether or not we should be stopping at every encounter in order to throw this choice back to the community. Now that would occur every single day of our journey, and actually the large majority of people that responded back in the feedback as well as voting actually stated that it'd be better if we actually did it every second day. So during our playthrough, we're going to stop every second day and throw that choice back to you guys to help basically steer the ship of how this playthrough is going to go. Now, there was also a second choice that had to be made, of course, because we ended the last video at an encounter on our second day. So everything's lining up perfectly with how you guys want to progress this anyway. So we're on our second day. We have a choice to make, and you guys have already helped me in making it through social media as well as here on YouTube through the comments and even in the video through voting. So I will be doing this throughout the playthrough and gathering that feedback as I go along. So it came down to a 60-40 split, so it was very, very close, and actually option number A actually panned out as the winner, and this one is that we're going to use the distraction to our advantage and have the element of surprise for our Gearlocs, and we're also going to subtract the baddie hue that we make up by 1, which is going to make that battle a little bit easier. Now again, guys, remember, even though we didn't end up choosing option number B, and we may be losing out potentially on gaining additional loot, our battle will now be a little easier, meaning we have a better chance of actually being successful and gaining that progress point on the left at the bottom of the card we really need. Plus, we're going to gain 2 training points anyway, which is huge for us. Now, one thing to mention is if you watch the Gasket overview video from Chip Theory Games, you'll realize that Gasket uses loot very differently. At the end of part number 1, I had talked about how Gasket was going to use loot, and I may have actually misled some people into believing that I was going to use that loot at face value. In other words, whatever's written on the actual loot card. But Gasket very much uses loot very differently than other Gearlocs, and if you've watched that overview video, you've figured that out by now, or if you've already played the game, you already know that. So with all that squared away, I think we need to go to the battle mat and get ready for our very first battle in Undertow. Alright, so it's time to set up our battle mat, but first we have to get our battle queue going here, and we got to find out what our baddie point total is going to be. So first off, we know that we're going with the element of surprise, so whatever the baddie point total ends up being, it'll be subtracting 1 point off of that total. So we have 2 Gearlocs on our second day, so 2 times 2 is 4. So we have a total of 4 baddie points. We chose, though, to take the element of surprise, so we'll drop that down to a 3. Now you would think that might make you use one of the baddie stacks on either side of this tray, which are the mechs or the Krellin, and that actually would be incorrect, even though it looks right. In Undertow, these are new enemies that have shown up, but these enemies will be specifically called for on the encounter card using icons when they need to be pulled and brought into battle. So we'll talk more about that when we actually run into it, but I just want to mention, pretend those aren't even there. So essentially we have a row of 1s on the left in the tray, the middle of the tray is 5, and the last tray is 20. And we've revealed a couple of the baddies already, but we know we're going after the 1s as we cannot make it to 5 with the total baddie point total being 3. So now we're going to grab 3 off the top, and we're going to keep them in the exact same order that they are, with the face up one that we've scattered ahead on top. So just like that, we've actually done the whole baddie point section in the rulebook. We did step 1, which is calculate the baddie points using the day and the number of Gearlocs. Step 2 is drawing those baddies that are equal to the baddie points, and then we're going to stack them all on a pile. And of course, you always want to factor in during all that equation anything on your encounter card. It's very, very important. So in this case, we made sure to remove 1 point off the total. Now, if you take a close look just to the left of the name of the top baddie on the battle queue currently, this particular baddie has 2 swords crossing right next to its name on the left-hand side there. And what that means is that particular baddie is a melee baddie, which means it will sit in a melee position. But now we need to figure out what column it's going to come in as. And because it is the top of the stack, it will be coming in column number 1. I'm really excited for this portion because now I get to give you a general sense of what this battle mat is all about. We have a 4x4 grid here of 16 circles that is basically the strongest section of the battle mat, and we now have 3 new entries on the left side and right side that have been added in from Undertow with those numerical values kind of slotted in there. We'll talk about them when we run into them, but for now let's focus on the 4x4 grid. Basically, you'll see at the very top a bunch of them are colored, and they actually line up with the colors of those chips above them as well as the dice. That's because they're all tied together, and that is essentially how those baddies are going to come into the battle mat through those particular columns. And each of the columns are listed 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first baddie will come into column 1, second will come into column number 2, and third will come into 3. If any extra baddies come in during our battle at any point in time, they will come into any empty lane that does not have an initiative die or chip out in play currently, so 4 in this case. But we don't know if that'll happen. It might. We'll see. At the very, very top of this particular battle mat is what's called an initiative meter, and that initiative meter is going to be filled with a bunch of dice that's just above it, which are all initiative dice from the baddies, as well as all of the Gearlocs. So it's going to become your essential turn order round by round, and that leads me into the round die, which is right here. So this round die will tick from round 1 all the way up to 4, then flip to 5, and then finally flip back down to the fatigue round. And when it hits the fatigue round, basically that's where things get interesting. The first 5 rounds are all about battling it out, trying to take down everything on the mat and survive. But once it hits that 6th and final round, it stays in a fatigue round for the rest of the battle. And that fatigue round means at the beginning of every round, every living being on this mat is going to take 1 true damage. Now, what's really important to know about that is the fact that strategy really does come into play here, because if you happen to survive longer than the baddies when you get to that fatigue round, you can literally win just from the fact that baddies are going to die off. But this does not happen easily. Usually by that 5th and 6th round, your Gearlocs have taken some hits. And so things are kind of uneven at that point, and you cannot always guarantee that that fatigue round is going to save you. And if you tried to do that, you could run yourself into some serious problems. But I really like the mechanics of it from the standpoint of it keeping the game moving and ending the battle without it dragging on too long, as it's forcibly basically taking hits against everybody in play. So now that we have the general gist of what the battle mat's all about, minus these 2 new columns of numerical values here we'll talk about later, we're going to go ahead and start populating the actual battle mat with the battle queue that we've now put together. The very first individual on the top is going to go into lane number 1, which is right here, and goes straight down. So I've gone ahead and taken that marker as well as the die, and we're going to go ahead and take that first baddie, which we scouted so we know what it is, and place it on top of the column number or row number 1, so I guess in this case it's column, and we're going to go ahead now and put the number of actual health that this individual has underneath the chip. One of the coolest parts about Too Many Bones is the fact that everything's visually represented. From a distance, you can tell how much damage you need to do basically to take an enemy down. It's not just a number, it's a visual. Those chips are really useful that way from distance, from seeing how strong an enemy's worth of health is still remaining. So you can see this one with 6 looks pretty daunting already, but should be in the second column. Now, which of these 2 columns does this baddie go into when it starts? Well, you take a look at the chip, and you remember from earlier we mentioned it was a melee character. character. So it's going to actually move into this position to start, and that's where it's going to begin the battle. And then we go through the rest of the baddies that are completely unknown to us. Now we also have an initiative die, and the initiative die has the lane or the column that we're currently in, which in this case is 1 in the bottom right, and every other side of the die is just initiative. That's all it means. You don't roll it, you literally set it to whatever's on this particular chip. So this chip right here has a green 2, which is right underneath of the 6 for health, and that means the initiative of this particular baddie is 2. So we simply go ahead and we're going to go ahead and tick this to 2 for lane number 1, and we'll place it right in here. We're going to also make sure that our round marker is starting at 1 for the battle, of course, and we'll go ahead and be adjusting this initiative meter based on the baddies going into play. They'll be all slotting in from highest initiative to lowest initiative, from left to right. Now it's time to reveal the next baddie in the queue. We'll flip it over and see everything it has to offer us, which I'm sure is just pain and suffering. So we found ourselves a Goblin Devastator. That does not sound good at all. So you can see there that in terms of health chips, it's going to start with 3, and then the initiative, which is underneath of it, is 4. So the die for lane number 2 now is going to be set to 4. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and grab lane number 2 marker. We'll place that right here. It's going to go underneath of this baddie, and we know the baddie, we can see right on it, that is a melee baddie. So this will also be sitting right here, but first let's put our health chips on. So 3 health. So we're building ourselves quite the wall here up front that we're going to have to work through. And then the initiative die, as we mentioned before, is a 4. So we're going to go ahead and find the 4, and we're going to take a look at the fact that we already have an initiative die in the initiative meter at 2. So the 4 will go ahead of that 2, and we'll continue on resolving the rest of the baddie queue. And lastly, our final baddie is going to be, ooh, what is this? A dragon? That does not sound good. So it's going to be 3 health, 4 for the initiative, and also is a melee baddie. So we don't have any range in this. These guys are going to all want to get up close and personal with our Gearlocs. Time to get our last baddie ready to go. So the baddie will be coming in at lane 3 because 1 and 2 are already taken. So we'll take the lane marker, and you can see the colored marker really does help to distinguish which lane these are going to fall into. So it's a nice marker that way. I like it. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the number of health. So we know this is a 3, so we'll put 3 health underneath. Now, one thing to note is that if this baddie or any of these baddies happen to die during the battle, then essentially the initiative die and that chip, the lane chip, is going to go back to the top, and when a new baddie, if one happens to be in a queue that's still there because there's tons of baddies waiting to come out, then whatever the next available lane marker is the one that that baddie will come into, starting at 1 and going all the way down to 4 again. So we're going to go ahead here with this one, knowing it's melee, and it's going to go right here. So we have quite the wall of individuals against us, and we'll set this lane number 3 die to a 4 for initiative. Now you'll notice that these tie. We have 2 4s up in the initiative meter, and whenever they tie, whatever is the first lane essentially takes precedence. So when you're talking about lanes, we got a 3 and we have a 2. 2 goes ahead of 3, so the initiative for the baddies now are all set, and next we just have to move into what our initiatives for our Gearlocs will be. Alright, let's see how this pans out for initiative. We got a 5 and a 3. Let's go ahead and slot these into the initiative meter. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take our Gearloc initiative dice and slot them in. So Duster, she rolled a 5, so she's going to be going right at the beginning of the pack, which is awesome. Gasket rolled a 3, which lands right in between the other initiative dice. Now, just so that you guys know, if there ever was a tie between a Gearloc and a baddie, and that does happen, the Gearloc always gets to go ahead of the baddie. So that's something that's worth noting. So for instance, if Duster had have actually rolled a 4, then Duster would still be at the head of the pack for the first round. Then what I do is I simply just move all the dice to the very end of the initiative meter, and we use this as a way of tracking who's already gone by just pushing these dice along the initiative meter and resolving each of them. So the first character that will start will be Duster. So before we actually move Duster onto the battle mat in the position that she would like to be, first off I want to talk about a couple things that we have going on with Duster before we start the battle. So first off, innate ability. Right out of the gate we have the innate ability called Shadow Dweller, and it says Duster may start on any position on the battle mat. She also starts with Nightshade's initiative die and chip. So as of right now, the initiative die can go on the chip. It sits in the prep area and does not come out onto the battle map until Duster has taken at least a point of damage and basically starts around with less health than she would start normally when she's at full. So essentially, Nightshade won't come in to help unless Duster is hurting. We also have to remember we have a smoke bomb, which we can choose to use later on. But first, now that we've kind of discussed the general gist of Duster, we'll talk about the innate +1, which is something we could try to get later on, which is basically us accumulating enough bones all the way up to the 6th bone to trade in, and it would allow us to flip Duster's chip over to this side, which is the innate side, and we would gain a different skill called Shadowcaster. If we happen to gain that, it says in addition to the Shadow Dweller, at start of battle, Duster may place untargetable effect on herself. So basically she becomes like a ninja. She is going to hide in the dark and she cannot be targeted, which is awesome. So that's an ability I really would like to get at some point because I could eventually build Gasket to be my tank, taking a lot of the damage or impact against him, and then have Duster kind of hiding in the shadows ready to shank whoever comes near Gasket. So that would be a really cool tandem. I think that's why I really like these two together. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to get Duster onto the battle mat, and there definitely is strategy in where she should go. Just before we go ahead and place her, though, I want to talk to you guys about some of the baddie skills, because these come in really handy to know about in advance. They really can help you in deciding your strategy as to where to position yourselves when you start out. So first off here, the dragon baddie has a weaken 1, and weaken 1 basically means that you're going to go ahead and put a weaken effect die on the target of that effect, and the unit must reduce its dex by the number on the chip. So in this case, weaken 1 would be reduce your dex by 1. So what I'm going to do from Duster's standpoint is I'm going to have Duster actually sit right up against that particular dragon, and I'm going to use some loot because Duster has a lot of loot. So I'm going to put loose wires on Duster. Now you might be thinking I'm just wasting this card, but I'm going to use it as a way to basically negate the fact that this ability is out there so that potentially I can focus on something else. So it says right here, increase your dex by 1, place this loot in your prep area to remind you of use, and it's a single battle I get this for. So this is going to go in Duster's prep area when she starts her turn. Now I'm not placing that there right now because technically Duster's turn hasn't started yet. We haven't actually moved her die up in the initiative meter. We're still just getting her positioned, but I wanted to let you know the strategy of what I'm thinking. So that's kind of my aim there. Now in terms of where to position her to make best use of this, looking at that particular dragon, if I position myself somewhere like here or potentially over here could be good. I kind of want to put myself here so that I can maybe deal with this one, because this one's got some serious issues in terms of its abilities. First off, it has Detonate 2, and Detonate 2 says if the unit is less than full HP after moving, it will defeat itself and deal true damage to each adjacent position, including enemies as well, including Gearlocs, everybody. So true damage, the difference between true damage and just regular damage is essentially true damage can't be blocked. It goes straight through shields and it's going to hit you. Now, just underneath of that particular detonate ability, we have a Careless 1. And what Careless 1's all about is it has a bone symbol there. So basically, when this particular baddie rolls its attack die and defense die, as denoted right here when its turn comes around, if it rolls any bones, it's going to lose that number of HP. So it'll lose 1 for being careless. So it's actually basically hurting itself at times. And then the nasty thing is the detonate thing can trigger as a result of that. So that's going to be one of those things where we want to get this guy off the battle mat as fast as possible so that it doesn't explode. That is a bad thing. The guy in the middle, the biggest guy, is a monster compared to the rest of them, but basically has the ability of treasure and flee. So treasure says when this unit is defeated, you get to place a loot die in its position. So that's really cool. We'll see how that works if we can take it down, and I'll leave that as a surprise. And then flee is a different one. It says remove this unit from the battle mat at the ends of round 2 and 5. If this happens, the closest opposing unit with a loot must discard 1. So someone's going to lose a loot. It's basically going to like thieve something from us and run away, and then come back and thieve something from us and run away again, as it's also attacking But actually, that's the interesting part about this particular baddie, is that, as you'll note on the actual chip, it doesn't attack. It's actually just rolling defense. So it literally is just there to steal loot from you and run away. All right, so let's move over to Gasket and get Gasket all set up and ready to get into play. So first off, his innate ability is Steambot. So let's find out more about that. It does say Gasket starts with the Hydro Valve die and the primary canister die. So this primary canister, basically what happens is, with this particular Gasket bot, you're going to really want to have lots of canisters. You can see there's a secondary canister. You can get multiple canisters for this individual, and he uses Hydro as a way of spending resources essentially that he's managing in order to make attacks and do special things. So basically you take this die from the start, you're going to put it in a lock slot, but you're going to put it all the way up to its highest value, which is 5. So we're going to have that. It's basically a resource worth of Hydro that he can use when he's making his turns, and that's going to deplete as the rounds go on, unless you find some way to push that back up. This Hydro die, I'm going to have to roll every single time I make a roll with Gasket. Now, if I choose to do no roll, but anytime I use Dexterity for rolling dice, I'm going to have to go ahead and roll this along with it. If I choose to just use all of his Dexterity to just move, I don't have to roll this die. So that's one distinguishing factor that's very important, but you might as well just take it out and put it in the prep area, because essentially you've got this and you're going to have to roll it when you're rolling a cumulative pile of dice. The other thing you want to make note of with Gasket is that at the very start of battle, Gasket gets to place defense dice into his active slots, which is something that nobody else that I know of can do, at least to the level of defense that it currently has to start halved. So in this particular case, I can place 2 defense, which I'm definitely going to, into his active slots. So this is kind of a way of essentially saying, here's Gasket having some defense from the get-go. He is a gigantic bot. He's made of steel, so he can take a little bit of a beating even though his health is low. So you're going to want to keep an eye on those active slots and making sure the defense is always up. Now, in the future, if we happen to get all of the bones that we need in order to go to innate +1, which means we have to get to our 6th bone, it says right there, 6th bone, upgrade to innate +1, and it has to be something where you're actually collecting them. If you're not familiar with that, we'll talk more about how the bones work later on, but essentially that'll bring him up to Steambot Pro. Now, the benefit with that, just so that we're all aware, not only you get to flip his chip over and see the impressive side, which has nice stars on it, it says the same benefits as Steambot, except Gasket may now place defense in the active slot equal to the defense stat. So what's really cool about that is if he's got an 8+1, I'd actually be ticking this up to higher levels. I can go all the way up to 4, which is crazy. So that's definitely helpful for later on, something we would probably like to obtain at some point. The other thing to remember is that active slotted dice, like these defense dice, can be re-rolled, but will cost you a dex if you choose to do so on your turn. So even though I'm starting off with a 1 and a 1 here, I could choose to essentially take one of these dice out and re-roll it. The risk is that I could land a bone or something and not even get the defense I'm hoping to get. There's only a small chance of landing a 2 anyway, so re-rolling them is not that great, but we only have 3 active slots, so there's a little bit of management going on there with when to re-roll and when to just leave things alone. The other thing I could do as well, in order to save up space, is I could technically just tick one of these to a 2 and go like this. And actually, in this particular case, I'm probably going to do just that, because when I take damage, if it's 2, then my defensive die is going to be removed. If I take 1, I simply just tick the die down. So I think for the purposes of this, I'm leaving empty spaces open to fill with more defensive dice. I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 2. Now, when I was talking earlier about trying to get up to innate +1, it's a little bit more difficult on Gasket, and that's because Gasket has a lot of stuff going on. If you saw that Gasket overview video from Chip Theory Games, you'll understand that this Hydro Valve has a really nasty side to it that is going to get rolled at times, and this particular side of the die basically says that you must place this die in the backup plan if you roll that green bone, and then you have to actually use the skill in the slot of the backup plan right away. So for instance, if I rolled this with a pile of other dice, I'd have to actually slot this into the backup plan and do the hot fix, and I'd have to do it, which means I would then spend it and it would be gone. So you can see it'd be very tough to save all the way up to 6. So how do you do that, you ask? I think it's important to focus in on loot for a second to clear up any misconceptions on how Gasket can actually use loot, because he definitely uses them much different than any other Gearloc. So basically, while Gasket can hold loot, trade loot, and can even unlock trove loot, basically the benefits shown on the loot card cannot help Gasket in any way. So when we were originally setting up and I put these two particular loot cards on Gasket, I wasn't putting them there necessarily for their actual face value in what's stated on the cards. I was actually putting them there, and I probably didn't do a good job of explaining this, but putting them there so I could store them for use on Duster later, because something like the Fortunate Discovery could be really handy on Duster for gaining another consumable die later on. I wouldn't want to use them all up in the first battle anyway. This one here allows me to heal, and now at the point in time I put it on him, I thought it might make sense to heal him, but that's just because he has such a low health. I thought I could use it. That was a mistake and a slip up on my part. But really what Gasket can use these particular loot cards for is one of two things. The first thing that Gasket can use his loot for is to discard one loot card in order to uptick his power converter to the highest level, and in this case that is a 3. Now you might be wondering, what is the power converter? Well, the power converter is really important for Gasket, being that Gasket doesn't have much health. Basically, when I discarded that loot card, I can set the die to max, and then anytime during Gasket's turn, I can reduce it by 1 to self-heal for 1 HP, and I can do this multiple times a turn. So this becomes a really good way of keeping Gasket alive. The second way that I can use a loot card when I'm discarding it is I can actually go ahead and tick one of these sides as I please to whichever side I please. And on this Hydro Valve die, I know we haven't seen this yet in gameplay, but there are only 2 sides. So this goes on back to what I was talking about, trying to get yourself all the way up to 6 to gain that benefit with the defense dice. In order to obtain actual bones and be able to keep them there, I cannot have Hydro Valve land on this green bone because it causes me to instantly use my backup plan, which would flush it all out. But if I happen to roll a bone, I can, if I have a loot card to spare, discard it in order to set it to whichever side I would like. This particular side has me leaking Hydro, so basically my Hydro would take a hit, but at least it would keep my backup plan in check. The other thing you can do is you can actually discard this loot card in advance of even rolling the die and just set it to whatever you'd like. So either way, you can save yourself after the fact or before. So the last thing that I want to do before we move into putting Gasket on the battle mat is make sure that every die is on its correct side. So again, I'm going to take the Hydro Valve and put it in the prep area for now, because I know I'll be rolling it every single time I roll dice, and it's going to take up a dex when I roll it, sadly. The power converter also does not start at 3. That was for the purposes of this demo, basically, that I ticked it up to 3. It starts at 0, and every single time you go into a battle, it'll always be at 0 until you decide to discard a loot card. And if you do, then you tick that up to 3, and you have 3 health at your disposal, or 3 healing essentially, to bolster Gasket's ranks. But besides that, it's going to start at 0 all the time. We've got our canister at a full 5, we've got our defense dice in place, we're ready to go. Let's get Gasket onto the battle mat. Alright, so I've chosen to put Gasket right in the center, mainly because Gasket is ahead in the initiative meter from a blue lane, or lane number 1, which is our biggest baddie, and I might as well try to take a swing at it before it gets its defenses up to knock some of its health down. If we get super lucky, we can take it out before the end of the second round, because at the end of the second round, that baddie basically steals some loot and runs off of the battle mat. So we're going to go ahead and start things off with Duster. So I'm going to move the initiative die to the end of the track, and let's head over to the playmat and see what we have for options. So quickly, an overview of the Gearlocs turn sequence. At the start of your turn, you're going to go ahead and take a look at the chip that's on the battle mat for your Gearloc, and make sure if there's any dice that are on top of it, or die that's on top of it that's a condition or an effect, like poison for instance, that you resolve those conditions right away. So go ahead and do those at this particular time on activation. Next, you're going to be able to move your Gearloc if you so choose. I have 3 decks with Duster, so I could move using all 3 of my decks. I could move 3 spaces. I cannot move diagonally, I have to move orthogonally, but I could move up to 3, or just 1, or just 2, or none. The third thing you're going to do is determine your targets. You're going to select a target for your attack, your skill dice, or even your backup plan that you choose on using. No matter what it is, just get yourself in position and determine your target. Now for me, on the battle mat, I put myself up against a goblin at the beginning on purpose, and that will be my target. The fourth thing is to select and roll your dice, and so any remaining decks you have, you can go ahead and obtain that many dice in a pool to roll. So if I'd already moved to, I'd only have the availability to spend one more deck, so I could throw a smoke bomb, or I could grab one attack die or one defense die and roll it at this time. Then you go ahead and resolve those results. And lastly, the baddies are going to react. So sometimes the baddies will actually have a skill that's going to trigger, like something that's almost like a hit back or a lash back or something along those lines that may happen and hurt you. And you're going to have to trigger those and make sure that you're keeping tabs of those baddie abilities and when they trigger. And then finally, it comes to your end of turn and it simply moves to the next initiative die in the initiative meter. So now knowing all that information, we're going to go ahead and begin Duster's turn. I'm not choosing to move anywhere, but I'm definitely going to be targeting the Goblin Devastator, and I'm going to want to hit it for a lot. So I'm going to use my dexterity of 3. I'm choosing not to use Bottled Smoke. As a reminder, Bottled Smoke would basically make me an untargetable character. I don't really want that because then all the attacks go towards Gasket, and I don't really want that yet either until Gasket has one round to beef up his defenses maybe. And then I might maybe use it if it's worthwhile, especially if Duster gets into trouble. And remember, I still have Nightshade, so if I take hits, Nightshade will come in to help. So I'm going to go ahead and use 2 attack dice and 1 defense die. Another thing to mention, guys, throughout this is this part, or at least this first battle, is going to be a little bit slower than I'm normally going to go as I'm explaining things for the first time. But once we go through this the first time, I will no longer be repeating myself. We'll be moving into fast action. So I've got my dice in my prep area. I'm going to spend 2 decks on 2 attack dice, 1 dex on 1 defense die, and we're going to roll these things and hope for big things. All right, so keep your fingers crossed. Okay, so we got some good defense there. We actually got a really good defense, so I'm going to take that for sure. We'll be placing this in an active slot for Duster, and we also hit for 2. So now we're going to go over and take a look and resolve these dice for the attack. Alright, so Duster was able to make 2 hits against the goblin, and there's no defense on this goblin, so 2 damage is going to come off right away. Now we get into scary territory here because we're going to have to reference the abilities on this individual to see if anything triggered during that time frame, but we have resolved the 2 dice that Duster has rolled. And of course also the active die that we now have in Duster's active slot for 2 defense. Now we're going to go ahead and initiate the next individual, which just happens to be the one we hit. Now I want to revisit the ability that is on this particular enemy, and is the Goblin Devastator and has the detonate ability. So it specifically states if this unit is at less than full HP after moving, it will defeat itself and deal a number of true damage equal a number of true damage to each adjacent position. So the interesting thing there is after it moves. So what ends up happening with baddies and how they activate is basically a baddie is going to try to target its closest opponent, no matter what that is. So in this case, Duster is the target of the attack. Now, if Duster and Gasket were exactly equal away in terms of distance from each other, so for instance, if I had have actually placed, which would have been a legal placement anyway for the beginning of the game, but if I happened to in a later state had something like this going on, then basically everybody's equal distance to that particular goblin. And I have to take a look at the little crosshairs down there, and you'll see there's an individual in there with his arms down. What that means is that this enemy goes after the weakest of the 2 that are equal distance away. So in this particular scenario, Gasket would be taking the heat if this was the case, but because Gasket's over here, there's no need for this individual to move. Now, the whole situation of me putting Duster right in front of the goblin was specifically to avoid that detonation thing from going off, hopefully. If I move around the battlefield and it starts chasing somebody around at this point, that could result in a bad thing happening. So let's go ahead and talk about the baddie turn sequence as well now, seeing as we're going to be activating this baddie. And the baddie that's activating is that purple color. So we have the start of turn, which again is anything that has to do with conditions would trigger and that type of thing. If there's any dice or die that's on top of the chip, or anything that's even an ability could potentially affect that as well. We're at this point going to determine a target. So the target in this case will be Duster. Next, it will move. And as of right now, it doesn't need to move because the target is right in front. And next, skills. So if any skills
skills actually trigger at this point. We found out already that detonate is not going to trigger because he hasn't moved. So we're safe there. And the other ability is careless, and he has to roll dice for that to actually trigger anyway. That one is a result of bones being landed. So after that, we now go ahead and we're going to roll dice, and we're going to resolve the roll, and then the Gearlocs are going to have a chance to react if they have special abilities, and the turn ends, and we move on to the next initiative die. So you can see the Goblin Devastator has a 1 attack die and 1 defensive die that it's going to roll. So let's head over to the dice tray and do that roll now against Duster. A Goblin is making his attack. All right, we got a bone, so that's really good because a bone actually ensures that, oh, this is perfect. So first off, we got a bone to resolve and an attack die to resolve. This could not have landed any nicer. Okay, so let's talk about the order of operations for the baddie's turn sequence when you're resolving your roll. So the baddie landed a bone and an attack die damage of 1. So what's going to happen is you're first off going to go ahead and place any rolled defense dice on the baddie and apply the total rolled number of damage to the target of its attack, in this case Duster, and then resolve any bone triggered skills. So bone trigger skills happen after the attack. So in other words, just because you roll the bone and he's careless doesn't mean he's dead and the attack damage doesn't come through to me. I still suffer a damage. But the good news is Duster has 2 active defense, and I can block this because it's not true damage that's coming through. So I go ahead and resolve that hit by blocking it, and now the bone is going to cause the careless to trigger for 1, which is going to wipe this baddie off the map. Lane number 2's initiative die has been removed from the initiative meter as well as the lane marker, and they've been placed back where they originally started. The defeated baddie is now sitting off in a discard pile. We'll only ever bring that thing back if we run out of single point baddies. We then shuffle them all together and bring them back into a new stack. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to initiate the next individual. Well, we knew it was going to happen eventually. The yellow enemy here in lane number 3 is going to move 1 out of 2 different movement points it has in order to get close to Gasket, and now it's going to trigger its skill, which is Weaken 1. So now we go ahead and find a condition die with the weaken symbol, which looks just like this, and we're going to place this right on Gasket, Weaken 1, which is going to lower the amount of dex that Gasket can use on the coming turn. And now the dragon is going to roll its 1 attack die against Gasket. Here's hoping this isn't too bad for us. Oh, it's a bone. Perfect. That's awesome. So nothing happens there at all on that attack. Alright, so Gasket is not impressed by what just happened, and now it's his turn to retaliate. Now Gasket is weakened going into this, so his normal dexterity is 4, but it'll be reduced down by 1 to 3. So at this particular point, we can go ahead and take this effect die off, knowing that he can only roll 3 dexterity for this particular turn. So what's nasty about that is I really want to do an attack, so we'll go ahead and grab 2 attack dice, and we're going to be making an attack, I think, against this big guy here, because by the end of the second round, if he's not gone, he's going to steal loot from us, and I don't want that. I don't mind this weakened guy. He's not doing that much to us anyway. So for now, we're going to take 2 attack dice. We also have to roll this particular hydro valve, so that's going to take up our 3 total dex. I'm also choosing not to move prior to choosing these dice. So we've chosen our attack dice, we already have our target assigned, we didn't move anywhere, and we lost 1 dex, so we only have 3 dice to roll. I'm rolling the hydro valve and 2 attack dice, hoping to get a good hit here. I'm actually not going to go for defense at all. I'm just going to try to make a decent hit against this thing. We'll see how it goes. Oh, okay, so it wasn't as good as I thought it might be. This is basically going to cost us a hydro, and this is going to be 2 attack hitting, or 2 damage going up against that 6 damage enemy. Something to note about the Gearloc's turn versus the baddie's turn is the baddie's turn in terms of resolving dice is in order, whereas with the Gearlocs you can actually choose how you want to go ahead and resolve your dice, and that's actually an important part of the strategy as well. So in this case it's pretty straightforward. I don't have to worry about it too much, but there will be cases where certain effects should be triggered before others to get the best benefit. Things like that are good to keep in mind. So we did 2 attack damage against this guy right here, so we're going to knock him down by 2, which is decent. I'm hoping to damage him enough that Duster can get in there and get him out before he tries to flee on the second round. But we also have to spend a hydro, so I'm going to go over to my canister and tick that down by 1. The hydro valve die right here costs us 1 hydro from our canister, so we'll drop this down to 4. This die has now been resolved as well. For the end of the first round, the last baddie is this one right here, the largest one on the mat currently. We're going to go through its activation as well. I've moved the initiative die over to the left, so we have no more Gearlocs or baddies during this round to activate. First thing is starting the turn, determining the target. In this case, the target would be or could be Gasket, being that it's right adjacent to it, so no need to target Duster. It does have movement up to 2, but it doesn't need to use it, so it'll stay put. And next it'll use its skills. Treasure and Flee do not actually trigger on this particular round. Treasure is when it's defeated, a loot die shows up, and Flee is at the end of the 2nd and 5th round. It'll disappear and steal loot. But now we need to go ahead and roll that 1 defensive die that sits atop this baddie. So let's do that right now. Here's hoping this results in no defense. That would be fantastic. It got 1, so 1 defense will be going on top of this particular baddie. So when a baddie actually gains defense, it simply just sits on top of its chip, just to reference that. And if we make an attack against this baddie, we're going to have to factor in the fact that it does have defense now. But you'll also notice that it only is allowed to roll the amount of dice that's specified here, so 1 defensive die. So in the future, this baddie cannot re-roll or roll its defensive die if it's sitting on top of its chip. So we're now going to go ahead and reset the initiative meter. So I'm just going to slide all these guys down and we're going to roll this over to round number 2 and start it off with Duster. So we're starting off the second round with Duster, and what I really would like to do is have her move 1 for 1 dex and be adjacent to this baddie, who is likely going to flee at the end of this round, being it's the end of the second round and has that flee ability. I want to take it down before it flees, because once it does flee, whatever conditions, shields, or anything like that are on it are wiped away, and it goes back up to full health when it comes back out, which is really annoying, because if I do a lot of damage to it, it may just end up coming back out at full health again. So what I want to do is I want to likely use some of my loot, because if it does flee, it ends up taking loot away from the party anyway, so I might as well spend some loot to try to take it down. So I'm going to go ahead here and use Fortunate Discovery. It says select one of your consumable skill dice and place it in a spot on your mat. It's now available for use. So for Duster, I have Scrag Roots and Blade Dip. Both of them are basically abilities that will end up in a lock slot. Of course, I can only choose one of them here, but one is going to help me against conditions that affect my Gearloc, which is Scrag Roots. The other one is going to allow me to poison an enemy, and if I roll any bones while trying to poison that individual, there's a chance that it may not even be successful. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Blade Dip. So we're going to take that die, which is die number 8 from this, place it in the skill area here, and now we're going to go ahead and immediately roll it, because upon rolling it, Duster on the reference sheet says roll this skill when acquired and place it in a lock slot, and it's talking about Blade Dip. So we're going to go ahead and roll this, see what we get. Oh, look at that. We got ourselves a 2 just barely. It kind of sat in there at an awkward angle, but that's pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and slot this up here. Now how this works essentially is on my turn here, or in the future, I can go ahead and roll attack dice, and when I do, I can choose to dip it in I can choose to dip my blade in poison, essentially, and that poison can then land on the target of my attack. Now, the only downside is if I roll bones while trying to do so, it fails. So right away here, I definitely want to go ahead and tick this down to 1, and I'm going to do that like so. And basically what this means is I'm dipping my attack or my blade into poison, and what's going to happen is, based on the number of attack dice that I'm rolling here, I'm trying to avoid getting any bones. If I happen to land any bones, the poison effect fails. If I actually avoid getting any bones, in other words, I actually roll my attack dice like this, and for instance, and somehow land 2 regular attacks, then for every attack die that I used, I can put that much poison on the target of my attack. So in this case, 2 with this die result. So for my first dex to be spent, I'm going to have Duster move right here, so I'm orthogonal and adjacent to the target of the enemy I want to take down. And then next, with my other 2 decks, I'm going to choose to roll 2 attack dice in order to try to take this thing down. I'm also already gone ahead and ticked down my Blade Dip, knowing that I'm trying to go for poison here. Let's roll these attack dice and cross our fingers that I don't land any bones. Here we go. Wish me luck. All right, so we got a success there, not only in the attack, but also in the poisoning of this particular baddie. So we're going to be able to actually add a poison 2 to the baddie, as well as hitting it for 2. So let's go ahead and resolve the dice first. So with the 2 damage that I landed, 1 is going to be blocked by the defensive die that is sitting on top of this baddie. So there we go. That's all resolved for the 1. And the additional 1 is going to slip through, which is great, bringing the baddie to a total of 3 health. Now the nasty thing about this is I was really hoping to get lucky enough and be able to hit this thing with enough damage, hopefully a 2 and a 1 in my attack, to make this work out, but it didn't pan out exactly the way I wanted it to. Now again, going back to the blade dip, the max amount you can get off that particular die in terms of how many attack dice that you're using in order to get the highest poison hit against this baddie is 3. So that's something worth noting as well. In my case, I rolled 2 attack dice and they were both successful, and so the poison 2 is going to sit on him, so when he activates in the very near future, he'll take an immediate 2 damage, which is fantastic. Downside being he is not going to die. Next up on the initiative meter is going to be the yellow baddie. So the dragon is going to start us off. It determines its target, which is a Gasket in this case, and is now going to use its skill of Weaken 1 to hurt the amount of dex that Gasket can roll on its next activation. Next, it's going to go ahead and roll attack dice against Gasket, and hopefully this isn't too bad, but Gasket does have 2 defense, so we should be perfectly safe. Hopefully I can handle this hit. Yeah, it's 1 hit, so I'm going to be able to reduce my active defense by 1 in order to block it. So we're all good there. Next up is going to be Gasket on the initiative track. Now, for some crazy, insane reason, guys, I haven't been looking at this clearly in terms of what I can actually do to this giant baddie back here. We can actually kill this thing before it flees, because Gasket actually activates before it. And for some insane reason, I thought he activated afterwards, but he certainly does not. And with the 2 poison that is now on him, all I need to do is inflict 1 point of damage, and we are guaranteed to kill it before the end of the round, being that it is that particular baddie that will have to activate before the end of the round, which is perfect timing. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually get Gasket beefed up with some of his defense dice as well. We also have to roll the hydro valve again, so we know that's going to take 1 dex. I don't need to move because I'm currently happy with where I'm at. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in as many attack dice as possible, so 2 of course, and then we'll add in a defensive die as well. Now the only thing is that is 4 dex, and this weaken that has just been thrown us by the dragon is going to remove 1 of those decks from us, so we take 1 less die to roll. We have to roll this, and I really need to roll the attack, so I guess we don't have, or we won't be rolling the defensive die. So let's head to the dice tray and see if we get lucky. Alright, so here's hoping for good things. We need good attack numbers. Let's take them out. Nice, look at that. That's perfect. So we got a 3. Actually, you know what, guys? Gasket did all the work necessary. So first off, I'm going to choose to go ahead and resolve the attack dice for 3 damage. We can ignore the poison for now, because that would only have triggered if this particular baddie had a chance to activate, which happens actually next anyway. But the 3 damage is enough to wipe this one right off the map. Well done, Gasket. So that is another baddie down, and even closer to being successful. And all of our attack dice is used up on the 1 target that we chose. We lastly have the hydro valve that tells us we have to spend a point of hydro, so let's go over to our lock slot and tick that down by 1. In addition, the poison die that was on that particular baddie is removed as well. The hydro valve die has now cost us another point of hydro, which we're going to consume by ticking that down in the lock slot by 1. So with Gasket making short work of that particular baddie, we can take the initiative die out of the track along with the lane marker, and we're going to place it and reset it back in its proper position. And we're going to go ahead now, move the rest of the individuals left in the battle to the end. We'll rotate this to round 3 and begin with Duster. Now, I would absolutely love to be able to finish this first battle off without losing a single point of HP across any of my characters. That can be a huge advantage going into the recovery phase, where we can choose options that are not resting and kind of healing up. We can do other things that are more exciting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to end it right here by using Blade Dip. So the first thing we'll do here is move Duster. We're going to move for 2 decks to get right adjacent to this baddie so that we can make an attack. We're going to choose that baddie as the target. I'm going to consume my blade dip in order to try to help me out on the attack and poisoning. We're going to be rolling 1 attack die because I have 3 decks total. I've already used 2 to move, and this next dex will be spent to roll this die, hoping for decent results and no bones that'll allow me to put a poison on this enemy, as well as hopefully hit it for some damage. All right, so here's hoping for good things. All right, we got a 1. Not exactly the highest value we could have gotten, but it's something. So we're going to go ahead now and resolve this die by taking a hit away from the dragon. So we'll go ahead and resolve the 1 hit, which we know is going to go straight through, bringing it down to a total of 2 life. And then, sadly, we didn't have enough, but we'll now put a poison level 1 on it because we rolled 1 attack die and we're successful, didn't roll any bones. So that is going to place a poison on it, which won't kill it on its activation, sadly. So hopefully we can still keep ourselves from taking any damage is the plan. Now you guys might be wondering, why is that baddie that we took down back on the battle mat? Well guys, I forgot to place a loot die where this baddie happens to be taken down, because the treasure ability states that a loot die is placed in the same spot where that baddie is removed. So in this case, the chip would have been removed, and of course it's not too far gone to actually put this in play, because we still may be able to actually gather it even on another turn, potentially, although you can see here that I was much more enthralled in the fact of trying to take down the baddie than I was about going after any loot, because I completely forgot to put that die there. But the loot die is very, very cool, and I'll let you guys know what that involves right now. So if there is a loot die on the battle mat, a Gearloc that's adjacent to the position, so not diagonal but adjacent, which means orthogonal, may spend 1 dex on their turn to pick up the loot die. And when picked up, they immediately get to roll the die and gain the results. Gearlocs baddies can be on the same position as the loot die. So in other words, I could have put Duster right on top of the loot die, it wouldn't have disappeared. Basically, there's a number of different sides to this dice. Some of them involve healing yourself, some involve drawing loot or acquiring a consumable. You can potentially get a trove loot, or you may end up shuffling a special encounter from the encounter cards that we put away into the encounter deck. All right, so we're going to go ahead now and we're going to activate the yellow enemy, which is right here. So immediately the poison is going to take effect for 1 hit. And just like that, it's down to 1 health, sadly. I really wanted to take that thing down. Next up, it's going to make its movement and targeting. So as of right now, it doesn't need to move anywhere. It's closest to 2 Gearlocs. And now it has to decide which of the 2 it's going to target. The dragon is going to go ahead and target the strongest Gearloc in play when the distance between Gearlocs is equal. And in this case, being it's melee, it needs to be adjacent, which it is. And now it's going to make an attack against the strongest being Duster. She is definitely the strongest with the most HP. And you can tell that it's the strongest based on those 2 arms flexing inside of the targeted area just above where the title of the baddie is. And so at this point, we're going to be rolling, or actually first, before we roll, we're going to be actually adding a weaken 1 to Duster and then rolling a single attack die. So a weaken 1 has been applied to Duster. Time to roll for the attack. All right, here's hoping it's not too bad. I only have 1 active defense on both of my Gearlocs. Duster only has the 1, and that is the target of this attack. So if it gets a 2 here, it's going to take some health hits. Whew, just a 1. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and block that with the only defensive die that I have for Duster. So we are all good and no damage taken yet. And to finish off round number 3, Gasket is going to go last. So this actually works out beautifully because I'm going to be able to take advantage of the fact that Gasket has a ton of dexterity to use with 4, and the fact that it wasn't weakened this time around because the target actually changed for weakened because Duster got up close and personal with it, which is really good because it allows Gasket to have more options. So I can roll the Hydro Valve die. I can also roll 2 attack dice, which is the max Gasket can roll, and that should really do it for the 1 damage we need to end this particular battle, plus have an extra dex in order to pick up the loot die. So let's pick up the loot die first. I am adjacent, so I'm going to spend that dex in order to take that loot die right now, and we're going to get to roll it right away. Here we go, the loot die roll. Let's see what happens. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever gotten that one before. That one is the Shuffle Special Encounter, the Ebonite Doorway into the encounter deck, if not already shuffled in or completed. So we're going to have to check to see if it's already in there. But first, before I do that, I don't want to spoil anything. So I'll go to the box to try to find that special encounter off camera. I don't want to show you guys what that is because I don't even know what it is. I don't believe I've run into that one yet. Haven't been lucky enough to roll this. And I'm going to put that into the encounter deck and shuffle it in. That should be really, really cool, adding an alternate path, I'm guessing, or an encounter that we may not have ever run into. So now, knowing that we only have 3 decks remaining, I've already chosen my target, the only baddie left. I've got my Hydro Valve ready, and I'm going to be grabbing 2 attack dice. We're going to be rolling these and just really hoping for 1 hit. That's all we need, and we win this particular battle. So the only thing that could really mess this up is if we roll a whole bunch of bones. So hopefully that doesn't happen. So here we go. We're looking for a clean victory, no damage taken, flawless. See what we get. All right, perfect. We got our hits, we got our Hydro Valve, so technically we'd be ticking this down, but it's not going to matter. We're going to go ahead and resolve the hits first, and that's going to wipe out the last baddie on the battle mat. And that's all she wrote. So it looks like Duster and Gasket are quite the team together. So we've gone ahead and passed the very, very first battle that we've had to fight. Now we'll head back to that encounter card and see what we gain for success. So just before we go to the rewards phase, we have a couple upkeep things to do at the end of a battle. The first thing is to clear all of your Gearloc's active dice. So all of them get removed, including a defense dice. You don't get to carry those over between battles. And your backup plan. So if you happen to have any bones you were storing up, they're all removed. We didn't have any, so we have nothing to worry about there. We're then going to go ahead in the lock slots and we can choose whether they remain or not. So in other words, if I had a consumable that was at a particular counter like Blade Dip and I wanted to leave it there for the next time, I could. I used all of it, so I don't have it anymore. Whereas with the canister for Gasket, this can just be moved back to its skill dice location. It will be put back here in the lock section at full, ticked all the way back up to 5 the next time we start a battle, because that is just part of Gasket's makeup. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our 2 Gearlocs back off the battle mat into their prep areas with the HP that they currently have. You do not want to bring them back to your prep area and stack all the HP back underneath them that they would have started at full health. You're supposed to bring them back at the damage level they had to their prep areas. The great news is, with this particular first battle, we didn't lose a single point of HP, which means we were not only just successful, but extremely successful. I can guarantee you that will likely not happen in the future. With the battle mat cleared, we also want to ensure that all the initiative dice that are in the track come back out, and of course any remaining initiative dice that are still in there can be reset back to their original values. The round counter goes back to 1. We have the initiative die for Duster going back on top of the Gearloc chip in the prep area. Same for Gasket to be used in a future battle. And now we can move to the rewards phase. So now time for the best part is when you win and you get to go back and look at all the spoils of war that you've won. So we take a look at the choices. You can see the top one here in the circular area didn't have any bonus for choosing it, so we don't get anything extra. We would have gotten loot if we chose the option B, but we would have had more baddies to deal with. Maybe something with a effect nastier in combination with other ones that would have resulted in a different type of battle. It was nice to get out of this battle without any HP hits. That was huge. On the very bottom is the general success area here, so we're going to go ahead and accumulate all of those. We get 1 progress point, which we'll show on our adventure map by moving the bead further along the river as we journey from the shore and actually get into the river at this point. And then we also are going to gain 2 training points we can spend on both of our characters, 2 for each Gearloc. So for my first training point, I'm going to actually tick up health for Gasket. I want to make sure that if there's ever a situation where true damage gets through or we have a heavy hit against Gasket and my defenses aren't up, that I'm not just going to be taken out right away. So this is going to add another health chip underneath Gasket, getting it further ready for longer and more intense battles where it's more of a target. Obviously in this one it wasn't, the past one anyway. But one thing to also note with Gasket, if you haven't checked that overview video from Chip Theory Games, is that none of the skill dice for Gasket exhaust. That's something you're going to notice as we move forward. That means when he actually gains dice in these other areas that they're not going to exhaust. What he's essentially doing is managing his hydro at all times. So again, getting those canisters are really important. The question I have right now for myself is whether or not I should go ahead and get another canister, or if that's way too early to do so, and to maybe focus on a different ability, potentially cut or something else that has a star beside it that I can accumulate and add into my possibilities for rolling when using Gasket. For the other training point for Gasket, we're going to go ahead and train his cut ability. This is inside of the mode Destroy, and essentially this is going to be very interesting for you guys to see, as this is going to start counting for hydro when we use them. Remember, these dice don't get exhausted, they just actually deduct the amount of hydro shown by the drop up here in the top right hand corner. So this one will cost 1 hydro if rolled on that particular side, which again comes out of the canisters that are locked up there. The cool thing about cut that you might want to be aware of is the fact that you get to place a bleed effect on an adjacent unit and also place a bleed effect on a unit directly behind that one. So he's basically taking his gigantic blade here and hitting across 2 different spaces and inflicting bleed across both of them, which I think is really, really useful, knowing that the bleed effect is going to give 1 true damage at the start of that particular enemy's turn. And what's even crazier is that true damage that's hitting that particular enemy that's been inflicted is going to have that bleeding occur every single round for the rest of the battle. So taking a look over Duster in terms of what I want to use my training points for, I'm very, very tempted to use 1 training point for attack. I want to try to train my attack up a little higher, because now at this point, both of my Gearlocs can roll 2 attack dice, which is decent, but I have the dexterity in situations when I'm adjacent to baddies that I want to take down, and I may or may not have any more skill dice I want to use, to want to roll more than just the 2 attack dice. I'd like to bump it up to 3 possibly. So we're going to go ahead and try for the first time in this playthrough training up our attack. I'll show you how that works. Let's head to the dice tray and we'll begin there. So unlike the health and dexterity stat, which are automatic successes, in order to train up my attack, I need to take the default stat value plus any stat die that I have here and add them together. So that would be 2, and we're trying to train attack. So we're going to go ahead and grab 2 attack dice, and we're going to roll them. And if I happen to see no bones, which is what I'm hoping for, then the training attempt was successful, and we can place a 1 stat die in here. We successfully used that training point. Now, if we fail by rolling a bone on either of the dice, and both of those dice have a 1 in 6 chance of being a bone, then we fail the training attempt on attack, and we cannot use that training point in trying to train up our attack again. We would have to choose something else, so it kind of restricts us to trying to use a training point again for health. You can't retry, in other words. So here we go. We're going to roll the dice, see if the dice are with us. Hopefully we see no bones. That's what I'd like to see. So no bones whatsoever, which means that's a successful training attempt against attack. And we're going to go ahead now and put a stat die inside of Duster's stat area, denoting that she now has 3 available attack dice when making attacks. For my second training point, Duster is going to unlock Flint and Tinder. So Flint and Tinder has now been added to Duster's skill matrix, another die that can be rolled, but this one's very different. This is a die that is not rolled during the battle. It's actually rolled during the recovery phase, and you use it essentially as a healing mechanism to either heal up Duster or Nightshade. So it's going to help in the in-between phases when we start taking damage and heading our Gearlocs off of the battle mat back to the prep area with hits. Now, we went through the first battle without any of that, so things were quite easy for us that way, and we were able to come out without any damage. But in the future, we may have rounds where we come out extremely beat up, and I'd really like to have a die that can be in there to potentially allow us to choose other things when we go through the recovery phase. So Flint and Tinder is good for that. When we roll this particular die during the recovery phase, we can either land a 1, we can land a 3, or a 2. It really just depends on how the die lands, and that's how much you can heal either Nightshade or Duster. So another reason that this one was chosen is because the only other way to heal allies is during the rest and recover. Now, if I go ahead, I can choose to either rest and recover Duster or rest and recover Nightshade, but then that would leave me with one of them potentially being still wounded, and which is why this Flint and Tinder is so great, because that way between rest and recover and Flint and Tinder, I can almost guarantee in most cases that I'll be able to heal them all the way back up to full strength, which I think is extremely important and will likely come in handy later on. So we have now gained and used the training points that we got from this encounter. Let's go ahead to the adventure map and progress ourselves one more spot towards Nobulous. And just like that, we're going to progress ourselves down the river to the next node. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the card, which we just completed as well. And this will be great for people that don't have the adventure map. You're basically just going to slide this one underneath of the tyrants card in order to denote the progress is at 2. I'm going to do this off camera in the next shot. Now, just so you guys know, we are moving into the recovery phase right now. So we're going to be going through things like trading loot within your party, making a lock-picking attempt if we had trove loot, which we don't yet, but we're hoping to get some eventually. And then individual options, which will definitely have some selection there because we don't have any damage to deal with. We don't have to rest and recover. The other thing that's really cool, guys, to note is the fact that that was a timely decision to get Flint and Tinder, although not timely enough because I don't have any damage to heal with it anyway, but this is exactly the phase where Flint and Tinder would come into play, and I could roll it in order to heal myself right here along with the rest and recover individual option, which you can see where that can double up and be really helpful with Duster. So we'll start off by trading some loot, and I absolutely want to do that because remember, Gasket can't really use all the loot on him, but Duster can for face value, and I might as well keep maybe one loot on Gasket just so that if I need to get that power converter going, I have one discardable loot on him. But for right now, the ones that I have is this one right here called Loose Wires. This one's on Duster right now, and it allows me to increase my dex by 1, and I actually place this in my prep area, and that would actually give me an additional dex to use throughout the entire battle. So I want to kind of keep this on Duster because Gasket already has a ton of dex available to him at 4 and Duster only has 3. So I prefer to keep it on Duster. Malfunctioning mech is actually a really cool one, but I don't want to use it until we actually run into a particular type of baddie that we'll see later on. Mechs and Kremlin, all that kind of stuff. It's mechs that this one's all about, and essentially it allows you to increase your dex for 2 this turn, and then if you reduce the HP of a mech this turn, the loot is not discarded and can be used again. So as long as you're using this malfunctioning mech arm against mechs, you can actually continue to go ahead and do so, which is pretty awesome. The last loot piece that I have is the plated skull, which I can actually use 3 times. So once I start using it, I'll keep track of how we're turning the card. But essentially at the start of the round, you may place 1 defensive die in an active slot. So when I get into a situation where I think I need dice for defense and I haven't been rolling well, getting too many bones, then I can go ahead and play the plated skull in order to kind of put some defense up in front of me. I like all of those being on Duster because Duster doesn't generate very much dex or very much defense dice as much as Gasket does, but Gasket's currently holding 2 loot himself, and I can hold 4 on Duster, and I'd rather give one of these over to Duster, and that's going to be the Fortunate Discovery one that we picked up, and I'm going to leave the one that's going to stay on Gasket that I think is also really, really good, and hopefully I'll be able to keep it for later, is one that involves fully healing yourself if currently at 1 HP, otherwise heal for 2 HP. But I'll keep that there on Gasket for now. The Fortunate Discovery is going to get traded over to Duster, and that's going to complete all the trading between the 2 Gearlocs. The next thing we can look at doing during our recovery phase is making a lockpicking attempt, but we don't currently have any trove loot to do that on, so we're going to skip past that option and move into individual options for each of our Gearlocs, starting with Duster. So Duster's options include going ahead and resting and recovering, and not useful right now. Searching for better loot. I have tons of loot and I don't really feel like losing any of the loot I currently have. I like it actually. Or scouting the area. And I'm going to go ahead and choose to have Duster scout the area again so we can see what's coming down the line. So here's the roll for Duster's scout. A 2, and that is going to allow me to reveal 1 point baddie. Just a single 1 point baddie. The 1-point baddie that we managed to reveal is we see a chimp acrobat in the distance. This one has a blind strike 1, a dodge ability. These are 2 new abilities we haven't seen the playthrough just yet. It's got a full health of 2, which is not so high, but its initiative's quite high at 4, and it allows for 1 attack die when it comes up against one of our Gearlocs. I'd also like to follow suit and have Gasket do the exact same thing. We're going to scout again and see if we can see something out in the distance. I love knowing what's coming out in future battles. So let's see what happens here. We got a 1, so that's going to be another 1-point baddie. So of course, the one we already revealed is at the front of the queue. We're going to go to the second in line and reveal that one now. The second 1-point baddie in line is the Minikin Monkey, and it's an untargetable enemy or baddie when it lands bones, which is actually pretty difficult. So if this thing lands bones while it's rolling either its attack die or defense die, it's going to be unavailable for us to hit. It has 3 health, starts with 4 initiative, and actually is a ranged baddie, the first one we've seen actually at the 1-point level. So one thing that I chose not to take advantage of during the scout the area individual option for both of my Gearlocs is that I can, when it's revealed, a baddie, when I'm scouting, that I can cycle the baddie to the bottom of the active stack if I want to. But in both of those cases, I was okay with both of them. They might be a little pesky, but you know, we might be having a battle with a bunch of monkeys here really soon. That is another day complete. That is the second day in the books. We're now going to turn the dial of the day counter to 3. And now we're going to go ahead and check out our next encounter for day number 3 called the Krellin Cookout. It says a Krellin Surger carcass washes up on shore, reminding us that even the mightiest creatures in Daelor can succumb to the unpredictable hazards of the Sibron. Of course, we didn't realize it was a carcass until we had stabbed it, poked it, and otherwise attempted to completely annihilate it first. Upon our keen detection of its deceased state, our competitive natures kicked in, recognizing a great feasting opportunity is hidden beneath a sickening amount of oily scales, blubber, and guts. The most strong-willed among us race to see who can fillet the most bones from the beast the fastest. Knives ready? 1, 2, go. Simultaneously, each Gearloc will roll and re-roll their combined attack and defense dice equal to each stat as quickly as possible, keeping all bones as they are rolled. The first Gearloc to get all their dice showing a bone is the winner. The winner is going to gain 5 buff HP, and all other Gearlocs gain 2 buff HP. Encounter success is achieved no matter the outcome. Well, that's pretty awesome. This is literally just us sitting on the banks of the Sibron, literally just eating and filling up. Now, buff HP is something we haven't run into before, but this is amazing because this is going to give us some HP that is exactly what it sounds like, a buff. It doesn't sit underneath of our Gearloc chip. It just sits in our prep area, and is really going to help us when we head up against some of these nastier enemies. This could not have come at a better time in preparation what is likely to get tougher and tougher as we go along. So after taking a look at the encounter card, there's really only one way to do this when you're playing solo, and that's to basically fairly roll each set of dice kind of one after the other in order to determine who is going to consume the most amount of food based on how many bones we roll, because we're essentially trying to get all of our dice stat-wise to bones between attack and defense only. So this is not talking about dexterity or health, of course. So we're going to go ahead and grab Duster. Has 3 attack dice and 1 defense die, so we're going to grab all 3 of these dice. Now I can imagine if you were playing this with multiple people, this would become an absolute mess and so much fun to try to race your friends basically. But in this solo mode, this still is a lot of fun because it's interesting to see which character is going to get that huge buff as well. So we got 2 attack dice and then 4 defense for Gasket. So we're going to get those dice prepared. So first off, we got 2 attack dice right here, and now we need 4 defensive dice. So we'll grab those from the tray, and I've already got Duster's dice ready. So we've got, as you can see here, all the dice ready from the attack and defense from both of our characters, and now we're going to go ahead and start rolling. We'll start it off with Duster, because Duster is the leader of the pack, we're going to say, and has been since the beginning, being on the left. So we're going to roll to start, see if any bones come up. We do. We got 1 bone. So there's 1 bone in and 3 more to go. We're going to come over here to Gasket and see what we get. Holy, 3 bones. Okay, so Gasket really wants this. Coming back over to Duster. And all 3 attack. There's no bones there. It's 3 versus 3 right now. And there's another 2 bones for Gasket. Oh my gosh, he is running away with this. And going in with Duster, another 3 swords, no bones. Gasket, can he take it? No, not yet. Duster is going to go back in and 1 bone. So there we go. 2 dice, next roll. Last die. Oh, nope. Oh, it's down to 1 versus 1. This is going to be tight. And it's a miss. It's a miss. It's another miss. Another miss. There we go. Gasket wins it. So Gasket is going to take the cake on how much he consumed of that creature that came basically washed up on the shoreline, and is going to gain 5 buff HP, and Duster is going to gain 2 buff HP. So really, at the end of the day, they both win. But even on top of that, guys, in the success area of this card, we also gain a guaranteed progress point, as this is a passive encounter essentially, or a non-battle encounter, and we also are going to gain a training point to spend. So Gasket got the big win, so 5 buff HP going into the prep area for Gasket. This guy is ready to go now. We should just take on Nobulous right now, right? We've got so much HP going on. This would have been the fantastic encounter to get right before we go in to take on Nobulous, but we got a little early, but it still could be really good because this could help us ensure that we have a better chance at winning and progressing towards Nobulous in the end, which is always good. So 5 buff HP here. We'll put 2 on Duster, and then I'm going to quickly talk about how buff HP works. Duster came in second, and 2 buff HP placed into the prep area for Duster. Now let's talk about buff HP and the different benefits that it provides. So when you gain buff HP, you add the HP to the Gearlocs prep area, which we just did for both of our Gearlocs. And when taking damage, remove this buff HP first. So in other words, the buff HP goes away first before it comes from underneath the Gearloc in question, or in this case with Duster, even Nightshade. Buff HP is not counted towards the baddie targeting choice. In other words, when it comes down to an equal distance and it's strongest versus weakest between the Gearlocs, buff HP is not part of that equation. It's only what's on the battle mat under the Gearloc chip. So that's more of a targeting thing, but worthwhile mentioning right now. Or removed with true damage. So when true damage is applied, it doesn't come from buff HP, it comes from underneath the Gearloc chip. You cannot get around true damage. It hits HP under the Gearloc chip. And you can have multiple buff HPs active at the same time. So I could potentially have a buff that also sits in the prep area that's a separate buff and have them all being active at the same time. Now it's time for the best part, and it's time to train up our Gearlocs with 1 training point, as well as give ourselves a progress point for this particular day. So I think what I'm going to do for Gasket in order to spend a training point is I'm going to focus in on getting an extra canister. I want to, seeing as we got a really nice bonus with the buff HP for him, he's got some time, and during this time might make sense to actually get myself buffed up with those canisters so that we can really start filling out the other abilities and not having to worry about not having enough hydro to actually use those abilities. Because if I go ahead and grab another die that allows me to do something, they're going to start getting into situations where not only am I rolling the hydro valve, but these particular dice that I unlock also cost a hydro to use, and 5 is just not enough. He'll end up running out, and I'm really worried about that. So let's go ahead and take die number 6 in order here. So it's going to be this one right here, and this will give him an additional 5 going into the next battle, so he'll be able to stand up on his feet a little bit longer. Now over here with Duster, I really want to try to start making Nightshade a more flushed out character, because I believe this ally is going to help us quite a bit in the coming days. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock Promise of Prey. So Nightshade has now gained Promise of Prey, and that one states as a locked die that can be placed on a baddie. While Nightshade is on the battle mat, apply to any baddie, and on its turn, Nightshade may place itself adjacent to this baddie, and this baddie then takes ×2 damage the next time it is attacked by Nightshade. So basically, that's why it's a Promise to Prey. Now the cool thing with this one is the lock die, so you'll use it, spend a dex, roll it, it'll go into the lock slot, and then at that particular point in time it'll be used from the lock spot position and then placed onto a baddie based on the description I just gave you, and then used later to actually inflict 2 times the damage. And now, after another successful encounter, we're going to continue our journey down the Sibron to the next encounter location. And just like that, we've also represented our progress by slipping that successful encounter card underneath the tyrant card for a total of 3. We are now almost halfway to the number of progress points we need. It's a total of 7 in order to take on Nobulous. We're doing pretty good. So we've now finished dividing the spoils, applying training points, logging our progress, and we're moving to the recovery phase. At this particular point, we don't need to trade any loot at all because everything was set up from the previous day, and we had a really nice encounter come along, which is surprising, and actually gave us a ton of buff HP, which was fantastic. So we don't need to do any loot trading or lockpicking attempts as we have no Trove loot yet. We'll move to individual options, and we'll likely just scout the area again with both of our Gearlocs, starting with Duster. So the first scout is going to be for Duster, seeing if she can see anything further down the shoreline, and she nails a 3 on that roll, allowing her to reveal a 1-point baddie. So we have the first 1-point baddie and second 1-point baddie revealed, so we'll be going to the 3rd slot. Oh wow, so if there was ever a baddie that we may want to cycle to the back of the 1-point stack, it's going to be this one. It's a Signal 2 baddie. It says 1-point baddies, but basically this allows this particular baddie to bring baddies into the queue after the queue has been formed. In other words, once you're in the middle of the battle and you think you understand what's going on and you got the numbers down in terms of how many baddies you're up against, this guy starts broadcasting and calling out for more of his friends to come join in the party, making potentially you become even more outnumbered than you likely already are to start with. So if there was ever a baddie to cycle to the back of the stack, this might be the one. I think for right now, that's the wise decision. We're going to take this baddie and we're going to put it at the back of the stack. Now we're going to go ahead and make a scout action here with Gasket and see if we can see anything decent from distance. Nice, we landed a 6. This allows us to either choose a 1-point, a 5-point, or a 20-point baddie. We already have the first 2 1-point baddies revealed, and we even have a 20-point baddie revealed from way earlier on. We have no 5s yet, and that's exactly the number we'll likely to see as the first baddie to come out during the next potential battle encounter. So let's definitely check to see what the 5-point stack has for us. Gasket has spotted in the distance a primate trap smith, and this thing has an ability that says trap as well as blind strike 1. These are 2 new abilities we haven't seen in this playthrough just yet. Health wise a 6, initiative wise a 4, and when it rolls its dice, it rolls 3 attack dice and 1 defense dice. This guy is not joking around. And just so that you guys are aware in terms of whether or not I put that 5-point baddie back at the very front of the line or put it at the back of the stack, it is very much at the front. So you can see now we've scouted ahead. We know a 1-point baddie, another 1-point baddie behind it, a 5-point baddie, and a 20-point baddie, all going left to right in the tray on screen there. But now we're moving into a new day, so we're going to turn the day counter to 4. That's going to definitely make things more interesting as we go into the 4th day. But this is the day where we turn the encounter choice around to you guys. Day 4 encounter, fish and ships. The river teems with mud gullets and ribbits, frog-like creatures that subsist on nothing but riverbed silt, leaving the river crystal clear underneath the blistering sun. The Sibron's depth varies dramatically, and locals often debate about whether the lowest river floor is merely a few or hundreds of arrow lengths deep. Whichever is true, the water is deep enough here to swallow the ship we see below as we slowly pass over. The sun is brutal and we're completely famished. Some fishing in the shade would allow us some respite, but the potential of sunken treasure is tough to ignore and beckons us to dive below the waves. Now you guys have a really cool choice here between 2 different options. You'll see that there is a purple icon that's circular up here, and this denotes the fact that regardless of our choice, whether it be option A or option B, we're going to be on the river for the first time on the battle mat, which is going to be exciting. The first one says fish and chips. The battle queue is going to be made up of Krellin, and at the end of each round, remove Krellin. If not already defeated, then add a new Krellin. Battle ends at the end of a round. The number equates party size. Gain 1 buff HP for each HP removed from all Krellin. Party may distribute as desired. So basically we're just going after Krellin like crazy in this one. So that's the first option, and it doesn't actually give us any bonus if we choose that particular one, but of course we'll always gain the success on the bottom of a progress point and a training point. If we want to push our luck a little bit, we can go for the second option. Now the second option you can see here is more of a passive option. It actually results in no actual battle mat activity. It simply says treasure, hold your breath. Each Gearloc draws 1 trove loot. To make a lock-picking attempt, reduce HP equal to the number of attempts by that Gearloc. May not lose last HP. Gearlocs may attempt to open another Gearloc's trove loot. Successfully opened trove loot are kept and remain unlocked. Unopened trove loot are immediately discarded. So essentially we have like 1 chance to try to hold our breath and unlock these things underwater as we pass by them. Both choices, encounter success is achieved no matter the outcome, and of course we gain, as I mentioned, the training point and progress point. So now it's up to you guys. I'm going to put a voting mechanism within the video here. You'll see an eye up in the top right hand corner that should allow you to go in and actually vote on which option you'd like to see us do next, and it will keep a tally of the number of votes by the end of it before I film the next video. So we're going to have option A in there for fish and chips and option B in there for treasure, hold your breath. So go ahead and make sure you vote in there as well. If you can't find it through that means, you can definitely comment down below, and I'll be taking a look through the comments and accumulating the votes there as well. And with that, that is going to end part number 2. Thank you guys so much for watching up to this point. One thing I want to make mention of, guys, is this was definitely a more lengthy video, especially than my part 1, because we got into the battle for the first time. So I went through a lot of explanation in terms of rules. Now, just so you guys are aware, for those of you that have played the game before, going forward, unless of course new rules crop up, of course we'll review abilities and things like that. Krellin and mechs we haven't seen yet, but in terms of understanding the mechanics of the battle and things like that, I'm going to be explaining less and less as we go along so we can progress the journey at a faster pace. But this is also helping individuals who have not had a chance to ever play Too Many Bones get on board and understand how the game flows. So hopefully this works well for everybody. Thank you guys so much for your support, and as always, keep on rolling solo.